if you think back on the sacrifices that not only the group made, but their families at home, the wives and the kids. World War II is kind of important to me. My uncle, my father, well, my two uncles, my father both served. They all served. My one uncle was a B-24 pilot, though. He flew out of North Africa and out of Italy. So he was doing the Palesti and the southern areas in the Czechoslovakia and stuff like that. So, and there's one thing also I'd like to mention to you guys. There's a very interesting story that I came across, and it's about a B-17 group that had been obviously the 8th Air Force because they were from England, right? And they were on their first mission, and they got beat up pretty badly. And there was an ME-109 pilot that had been working on them. And not only did he do that, then he ran out of ammo because he was chasing them down because they were down with just a couple engines. And so he landed at this field and got refueled and got rearmed. And they happened to just fly over the field as he was doing that. So they put him back up in the airplane, and he went up, and he finally caught the guys. And he looked inside that the airplane and saw all the guys that were killed and wounded, and he couldn't do anything. He was not willing to shoot them down. And they were headed to Bremen. And for those of you that have any idea about where Bremen is, it's on the coast. So they were coming out over the North Atlantic, and that was very heavily defended with anti-aircraft. And he knew that they stood no chance in going there unescorted. And because the German Air Force did have some B-17s, what he did is he flew off the wing of them and escorted them safely out to sea. Okay? And there's a book about that that's called A Higher Call. And I would highly recommend that any of you that haven't ever read that book.
It's wonderful.
It's a wonderful story. It's an amazing thing. And the two pilots eventually got to meet each other. And of course, he couldn't say anything because he would have been executed. The American guys couldn't say anything because they didn't want to have the pilots of the other B-17s thinking that they were going to be saved just because the Germans going to take pity on them. So all of these go back, and when you get back to the Vietnam guys and to all the Vietnam guys that are here, I'm going to tell you welcome home, because I know that I didn't get that. And so I go to all the vets and I tell them welcome home. And actually I think that belongs to the Korean War vets as well, because they didn't get quite the reception. One of the reasons why I wrote the book was a guy that was a Korean World War II and a Korean Navy pilot flying off the Valley Forge during Korea. He wrote a book that was all based on his diary. And I thought, well, I kept a diary over there as well. So that was the reason that I ended up writing the book. And the book that I've got kind of details is exactly what our operations were like day to day. And that's another reason why I give this presentation. Because you don't really understand when you're back on the line for over a 30-day period, and you're sitting there flying two flights a day, 12-hour day, and that's just the flight day, not the briefing, not the debriefs, not going back and having to do your other duties. That was quite an intense period of time in our lives. And so consequently, that's why I ended up writing the book. And I also give this presentation like Brent was saying, because we lost 5 guys in my squadron. We left the States with 14 airplanes and 18 pilots. We lost 15 airplanes. So we lost all the airplanes we had, and they replaced them, of course. But at one time, we were actually down to just so few airplanes that our skipper was considered only a detachment. We weren't a squadron because we didn't have enough airplanes to fly. But we lost 5 pilots at KIA. We had 3 that suffered severe injuries and couldn't fly again, and we had 3 POWs. So out of the 18 guys, we lost 11. Now, I came upon this video, so I'm going to show you 5 minutes of a video. This was the Oriskany in October 1966, and so in 7 days we had the fire and lost actually a lot of these airplanes and lost some of these pilots. But I'm going to go ahead and play this video for a few minutes, if I can find the right place to put them. And this will give you an idea of what the operations are like on a carrier, because they are choreographed by the colors of the shirts of the guys that are wearing. The only people that can direct the airplane are guys. This is an F-8 photo bird going off. That's an A-1 Spad. He's going out. They were Sandys at that time. And this is an A-4 coming up onto the Cat. That cable he's working with there actually hooks onto the airplane and pulls it forward. You'll see how it goes over the shuttle. And then the airplane has a holdback that has to break at a certain tension. So that keeps you from getting what we call a cold shot. That happens to be my airplane and me in it, that 304 right now, and loaded up with 500-pounders. That shows you how quick that shot is. That's the shooter, is what you call him. He's a naval aviator as well. So the guys that are have different colored shirts. They do different things. Red was the munitions guy. The greens are the guys that you see working there. Purple. You had different colors of hair or caps that go along with them as well. But the only people that could actually guide the airplane at all was a guy with a yellow shirt. There's no voice, there's no radios, nothing. Everything that's done on that carrier deck right now is done by hand signals and by people that are actually been taught how to do that job. So that you got 30 knots of wind across the deck, you've got all those jet engines running. There's just no way you can communicate. And you can see the pace. This is just the pace of the launch itself. So they keep bringing airplanes up, getting them ready to go. And you're going to get to see some pictures coming up of the kids that are actually doing the shooting. They're sitting there on the side, and they're being directed by the shooter. And you can tell when they're sitting there and giving them the signals up, whether they're ready to shoot. And then they'll push the button, and there you go. And there's an A-4 going off. You can see the pitch that you have to take to get that thing to start climbing. This is an A-3 Whale. It's a rather large airplane. It was supposed to be a bomber, but as it turned out, it was really a refueler for us. We lost one of these. There's the A-3 on a missed approach. It didn't show you the shot. And here he comes back in, and here is landing. But you'll get a chance to see some other carrier landings here. And then at that point, we'll stop the video, and then we'll go on with the PowerPoint presentation. The CVW stands for Carrier Wing 16, and there was a heavy 10, VHA-10 was that. Here's the F-8 Crusaders coming aboard. You can see that they come aboard pretty fast, especially for a small carrier like that, and they will actually raise up on the main gear, comes up off the deck when they're catching the wire. You'll get the chance to see that again. Right now they're repositioning the airplanes. Back then they put all the things in the back after we recovered and got them ready to go, and then shoot them off the front, because we only had 2 cats. On the new carriers now, they got sets of 4 cats. Got so much land area on there, they get airplanes everywhere, and guys even land in between airplanes. This is the VA, or the A3 getting ready to go. So that cat stroke, it's less than 2 seconds, and in the A4 we went from 0 to 140 knots there on the launch. There they are moving the SPADs around again. Comes the A4 coming on board. You had no nose wheel steering. We ended up using just differential braking. You'd let it roll back there like we're doing. When you'll see it rolls back, that's to drop the hook. You hit the left brake, and that takes the nose wheel over to the right. Hit the right brake and get off, and you got 30 seconds from that recovery time to get clear decks for the next guy to recover. You see how that's kind of a violent catch there for the F-8s, especially on the small deck carriers. I think that's the end of this. Let me see if I can turn this around better. They were going to interview the skipper of the ship, Captain Arabino, which was really a nice guy. And unfortunately, come on. When you're the captain of the ship, you're held responsible. The fire, he had nothing to do with being able to come on. I don't know why we can't get a whole slide here. But
It's showing the hole on here.
oh, it is? Oh, okay. All right, good, thanks. All right. This was my squadron, and there's you saw just basically the colors of them. Our sister squadron had a red V-tail, and we had the blue. And this is the map of North Vietnam, and since my laser doesn't really actually work on the screen, so what I'll have to do is just sometimes point out that this was two different circles around Hanoi, and then we had route packs 1 through 6. The Air Force had route pack 1, which was down right by the DMZ. The Navy was route pack 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6B. So we had responsibility for the Haiphong, and of course Hanoi was up to all of us. But they had restricted areas around that, and we basically had 3 different wars over there. 66 was one war, 67 was another war, and 68 was another war, because they changed the rules and what we were doing. Initially in 66, we weren't able to go in to the Hanoi area, and we weren't also allowed to drop on when we saw them building the missile sites, we weren't allowed to drop on it because they were Russians and Chinese people down there. They didn't want to get involved with having to deal with the Russians and the Chinese. So the SAM sites that were going to be used against us the next year, we had to sit there and overfly them while they were building them. And so it was quite different. What we did, and you'll get a chance to see that as we go along here in the video or the pictures. This is a form of transportation over there in the South China Sea, at least back in the 60s. I think they still probably have those types of vessels over there, but not nearly as many as they had back in the 60s. This is a picture of a Russian bear that I took. The F-8s were notoriously bad with maintenance. They always had a lot of problems. And so the F-8s were normally used to intercept the bears. Whenever we would go up into the Sea of Japan, when we left Vietnam and say we were headed towards Japan, you were always going to get a flyover by the Russian bear. And so I was the duty tanker for the two F-8 guys. They went down, so they launched me, and I went up and took his picture. And
You took that very picture?
yeah, all these pictures on here I've taken. Yeah, and this was the picture that I had to have, because if I didn't, and I didn't get that picture, I was going to be in deep trouble with the Admiral. You'll see that now the F-8, they did get an F-8 airborne. There's the bear, there's the F-8, and there's the ship. And that's to prove that he was being escorted, okay? And then it was a Navy camera. It wasn't my camera. And that's why it's a black and white film, because they use black and white, and I use Ektachrome, which we could develop on the ship. And so this camera jammed after that picture. So thankfully I got it. Otherwise I've been in trouble. This was the next year in '67. You can see he's coming over us this time, and there's the F-8 escort. And he's taking my picture while I'm taking his picture. Yeah, they're still using them, as you know. That airplane's still active in the Russian Air Force. All right, there's some helicopter pilots, and they would be well aware of what these are. And these were our angels. These are the people that would sit there and be available to pick you up if you had something go wrong off the carrier. And usually we'd have a couple of them up airborne. They would stay over on the starboard side, because the landing traffic pattern is to the left. So what we come in down at 600 feet on the starboard side of the ship, formation, brake, go left, and come back around to land. So they'd be on the starboard side and sometimes to the stern. So that gives you another good view of him. And that's food for an F-8. That's not me in there, but our kids, we worked our troops so hard that no matter when they could, they would grab a second of taking a nap somewhere. And so the place where he could find where it was nice and dark, right there. And you could see that there's a pilot actually starting to man up. So the kid got out, obviously, before they started engines. However, I did see, because the F-8's so low like that, and it's got that large of intake, I did see a kid he was sitting there, a plane captain, trying to do his job, taking care of all the chains and stuff, slide back underneath there about the time the guy added the power, and it sucked him right in. And it killed him. It was a shame. I mean, the kids that we had working there, they were all youngsters, and they worked their butts off trying to keep us. We were basically just the pinnacle. We were the sharp end of a long arrow, okay? But without the people there making the arrow, you didn't have anything. There's the plane guard. That guy, he's also, he would stand behind the ship like that during the recoveries, and he would also be available to pick up pilots. I used to like to run at him, play chicken with him. Initially, the first couple times they actually turned. After a while I did that a couple times, they decided, the heck with him, we're going to just let him hit us. So then I had to break off. But it was fun. You had to come find things to do there while you were sitting there, because the days were tending to be long, and I was in maintenance, and so I would do maintenance test stops, so that I'd have these free trips where I could go out there and play with the airplane. There's one of the yellow shirt directors bringing the F-8 up onto the cat. You can see that the wingtip, the vortices from the engine, the prop, are going supersonic, and that's what you're seeing, that little bit of steam from, or not steam, but it's the condensation from the wing, the tips from the prop. That's the cockpit of an A-4. It's very tiny. Actually, they had to take for me to fit in, they had to take the padding off the sides of the canopy, and I used to have to unlock the canopy with my right arm. I couldn't unlock it with my left arm. That's the bomb site that we would look through. That's one of the ground crews sitting there. This was obviously at a store, getting me to open up flaps so they could check doing a pre-flight check on the airplane. That's our basic cockpit. So your legs went up underneath your panel, and you could see you only had about a hand's width on both sides of you for handling the radios and various switches. And these switches down here are what handled our bombs, where you'd select what kind of methodology we're going to use for dropping the bombs. That's the cockpit for an F-8, and you can see he's got a lot more room. So he was pretty comfortable in that. And that deck, by the way, is wood. And we were actually slept right below, or I slept right below that deck in 1966 when we got the fire. And when I first got aboard, it was in a JO bunk room, and we had two double bunks in there, and there was about 14 of us in there. But all the top bunks were empty, and so I was having to take a top bunk. So, my first night aboard there, it rained, and I got soaking wet because the roof leaked. Actually, my shoes sat there. I had taken off my shoes. They were on the floor in the passageway between the bunks, because he had sets of bunks just lined up. They were sitting there floating away, and I, being rather stubborn, I wore those damn shoes even though they squeaked until I got out of the Navy. They were brand new, and they got soaking wet, and of course it was. But so every time an airplane, and the thing was, not only did it leak when it rained, it would catch the water between the wood deck and the metal deck, and so every time an airplane would roll over it after it had rained recently, you'd get more water coming down. So the first thing I did was went through and made sure who I was senior to that was on the lower bunk, and I kicked them out and took my lower bunk. So there's the A-4 hooked up on the cat. This was something you didn't have a chance to see on the video, but this is the holdback. And this holdback goes up to like a little dog bone, okay? And that dog bone has a machined area where it thins out. But it's designed to break at a certain amount of tension. And so that means that unless that shuttle starts moving forward at the proper tension, that airplane's not going to go anywhere. That's the salute. You salute the shooter, and that means that you're ready to go. And after he sees that salute, you better hold on, because that's what it looks like. That's the side of the fuselage here. You can see the stretch marks that are occurring on the airplane when that shot is. So that is one I took, and that's 400 psi in that nose wheel there. And you can see the holdback is already let go, the steam is starting, and that thing went down on the rim, and that's the way we shot. It went out on that rim, flattened that tire. That's the amount of force that it was taken to get those airplanes airborne.
Does that mean you came back aboard with a flat tire?
No, it made it. Well, I did at one time. When I did that time, though, it also knocked the gear off. But no, it really made it. I don't ask me how. But yes, it could happen. But most of the time, we came back with the tires still good. Again, that shows you a little bit of the idea of the rotation. That's the F8 guys, of course. They didn't trust it, so they just put their burner on. So we always called them chicken. I mean, you got to understand, in the military, it's easy to pick on your buddies. However, you're going to stand behind them all the time. You know that. That's the whale coming up, putting up his wing. There's his salute. He gave the guy the finger. Because the pilot's on the other side, and this is his navigator, okay? They don't have ejection seats. And that was one of the reasons when we had one of them, they have cat hooks that back in those days they had cat hooks that were machined, and that's what the cable that they call it a bridle hooked up to. One of the hooks failed, so the airplane went off spinning sideways, and just went off to the port side of the ship. I mean, and they all died. And there was 4 guys on that thing, and none of them had ejection seats, and there was just no survival. The thing about the cat shot was either you're living or dying. It didn't matter. If you didn't have to think about it. It was over in less than 2 seconds. So it wasn't like rolling down along the runway and trying to figure out, well, is this thing going to make it or not? You didn't have to worry about it. It was over before you knew it. But I was flying back with this guy, and so I got up nice close to him to get a good picture of him. This was my wingman. Dropped, slid back, and you can see we're loaded here with the 5-inch Zuni pod, 750-pound bomb, and another 5-inch Zuni pod on the other side. And that meant that mission was going to be basically suppression of the guns. You weren't going to be. That's what we used. Those Zunis. Those were really nice for when the guys are shooting at you, because all you had to do, because it was basically you just point the airplane, pull the trigger, and that 5-inch rocket, it was fairly true, and it came off. It had a radar fuse on it, okay, and so once it got in there, and once the guys that the people on the ground weren't stupid. So once they saw you coming in and they saw that rocket coming off, they were diving for some kind of shelter. But what we faced over there was 20 miles out, you had the missiles. Okay? So once you made it through the missiles, then you usually had the 85s, 57s. You had a 23 millimeter gun that was shooting at you while you were going down in a 45-degree dive. Well, that had 4 barrels on it, that 23 millimeter, and was 6,000 rounds per minute. So it was shooting at you quite a bit, and you'd hear it coming by you, sounded like popcorn going off. And then the 37s were sitting there layered at your rollout altitude. So what we would do, we had the Shrike guys, which the Air Force called weasels. Okay, those were my sister squadron. They carried the Shrikes. They would go in there and try to take down the radars that either were controlling the missiles, or they had other radars like what they call the fire can. It had a noise that went like that, and that's what would control all the guns. And so they would go there and try to get down the radars, and we would sit there with usually 2 to 4 A4s, depending on how many we had, sitting there. And our mission then was to go after the guns while the guys were bombing. So because you didn't have to climb back up to altitude to drop a bomb, with that Zuni, you could sit there and weave down at low altitude and just pull over here, shoot, pull over here, shoot at another guy. And we would we'd be there in advance of the strike group as they're inbound, just getting ready to roll in. We'd be on the guns. While the guys were in the dive bombing run, we were on the guns. And as they were leaving, we were on the guns. And then we got to leave. So it was a mission where I lost one of my wingmen to a SAM that I saw it. It went right underneath me and it hit him, and his body is still there, by the way. And because they couldn't find any remains, he will always remain there. And you'll get to see Jeff's picture later. But that was the kind of mission that was. When you were on the anti-gun stuff, it was not a lot of fun. That's what the Zuni looked like when you fired it. This would be a normal bombing mission, because you can see here you got it's loaded with 6 500-pound bombs. That's what it looks like when the bombs come off. Now we're going out on the strike. You can see the Zuni pods there and the bombs on some of the other guys. This was the refueling. We would buddy store with another A4 for tanking, and of course the A3. In this particular case, those airplanes, we had to take off without total fuel on board because of the weight. We were carrying 5 1,000-pounders, 3 1,000-pounders centerline, 2 on each inboard, and then 500 pounds on the outboard. So 6,000 pounds of bombs on an airplane that had a 6,500 pound thrust engine. And we couldn't quite, you didn't have enough power to get her airborne if you had full fuel. So we always used to have to top off going inbound. That gives you another idea of what a strike force looks like. That's the F-8s over there. They would break off and go in a little bit early, looking for obviously the MiGs, and give us cover for the MiGs. You can see here you got some blue tails, you got some orange tails, the A4s. We basically had section integrity. It was just two airplanes. You flew out pretty much a beam, and each guy was protecting the other guy. You had to separate because of the missiles. When you started, there'd be sometimes so many missiles that what you had to do is look and see, is that sucker tracking me? If it wasn't tracking me, forget it. Go on to another one. And then I got the nickname Mule because we had a Tennessee guy join the squadron, Jerry Felterbreast. His wife was Ophelia. Of course, it's call signs. Anyway, he ended up becoming an admiral. Jerry was a very experienced instructor in bombing techniques, having spent his mission part of his career at VX5, and he kind of helped us out with some of the bombing techniques that we needed. But anyway, he called me Andy Mule. Because my first nickname was Animal, but he couldn't say Animal. He said Andy Mule. Well, that makes it 3 syllables, okay? And an F8 guy, one of the F8 guys, sit there was trying to say, Andy Mule, you got a missile coming up your ass, and it didn't work. He never got it out because the missile hit me anyway. So after that, we just changed it to Mule. So there they are. They're welcoming us into their country. And you can't blame them. I mean, actually, we're sitting there bombing them, and, not much fun. Look a little bit at the countryside from the water coming inbound. This would be on more of a recce where you're just going out looking for traffic that's moving and try to stop the traffic. That's Cape Muiron. Physically, it was a very beautiful country, and it was very French because of the French heritage of that area. So a lot of the buildings were very French in design. It wasn't like South Vietnam. Here, this was more really nice houses, concrete type of telephone poles and stuff like that. So the north was the more sophisticated portion. Now, one of the things you always heard was how we were destroying the villages and how we were doing this and doing that. Well, those a couple trucks underneath a tree there in the middle of the village. And I don't know about you, but I don't think I see too much damage to the village, but I do see some burning trucks. And the black smoke means that that's a petroleum type look. When you see black smoke, that means something in there is petroleum, and so that would be, in that case, fuel. And that's another situation where we found a couple trucks. Again, on another village there, you see 2 bomb hits right before the third one got, because we were dropping a stick, so sometimes we couldn't be totally accurate, but we got close. That's okay, now we're going up, this was now more of a bigger mission. We're going after that bridge there, and that's what it looks like on the bridge. So we kind of took it out that day. There's a set of islands off of North Vietnam that are very similar to the islands off of Thailand, for those of you that might have been to Phuket and areas like that. And they're very, very beautiful. And now they're starting to actually get tourism there. But they were hiding their transportation there with these barges because they got a lot of waterways and they would move things via the barges. And that's when we took care of the barges. You can see that's not much there, just black smoke, but they're not there. There's a barge on one of the canals, and there's the result. And you got to remember now, these are iron bombs. We had to actually dive. This was the dive bombing started really with World War I, obviously. The Germans really enhanced dive bombing. They really made dive bombing a very accurate form of transporting the weapons. Of course, the Mighty Eighth and all of our basic military strategy that led up to World War II was level bombing, okay? So the B-17s and the B-24s and airplanes like that, of course, they were up and they would drop their bombs from a level altitude at a higher altitude, and they had various bombing sites to do that. Well, they would be like a 17 carried 10 men. But they got gas in that thing, which is highly octane. We had JP5, which is less than that, much less active, and less harmful to getting hit and starting a fire. And of course, that gas being very high octane gas, it didn't take much to get it hit by, their weapons to get on fire. And once it did, it usually tended to blow the wing off the airplane. We would lose 10 guys at a time. And that's a pretty tremendous affair when you think about it. Here, basically, it was just 105 pilots. There's only one of them. And A-4 pilots, there's only one of us. So if we were losing people, at least we were only losing them one at a time versus, 10 at a time. And when you think about all the poor guys that were just sitting there in that airplane having to ride along in that sucker for as many hours as they did, it's to me, it would not have been much fun. And to have the exposure that they had was pretty bad. They would take and they used the rail system, and they would actually sit there and hide good cars amongst the old cars. So one of the things we would do is count the number. We would take these pictures, count up the number of cars, so we could figure out which ones are the new ones the next time we flew over them and attack them. And you can see that's bombs on a couple of the cars there. And that's what that looked like after we took care of a few of them. This is an engine, and you can see we've blackened him with some, so you didn't see them out very often. This is where they're actually trying to cut into the mountain there to try to protect the engine. And I happened to be flying with a walleye, and the walleye was supposed to be kind of a standoff weapon. It really wasn't, but it was TV guided. It was a glide bomber with a 1,000-pound warhead. And I happened to have one of those on board. And so I put a walleye in there because there was very little threat around that particular area. I wasn't really getting shot at badly. And so I spent the time, took the walleye, dropped it. It slid up underneath that sucker and lifted him up and put him back down. So it's hard to tell that everything inside that or underside of it is not doing well. This was from 1966. This was a train that we found out, and one of the F-8 pilots saw this train moving. So he used his Sidewinder, which was a heat-seeking missile, put it into the engine, stopped the train. At that time, the executive officer, Brian Compton, who later became our skipper in '67, I was his wingman. He and I and a whole other bunch of A4s were loading up anyway for the next mission. And we heard all about that, so they loaded us up and sent us out after the train. So we had just a fun time because it was stuck between two cities, Nan Din and Ninh Binh. Well, and one had a 57 millimeter gun, the other one had an 85. So we were watching the stuff coming up, and we're sitting there, nothing around it, because you don't see the 37s or anything else around there. So we were having a wonderful time. And then they launched a couple MiGs, and they shot down one of our F-8s and shot up the other F-8. And I eventually got to meet the guy that shot down the MiG, the F-8 guy. His name was Nguyen Van Binh, and he was the smallest little guy. He looked like Ho Chi Minh. And when he was in 8th grade, they took him and they sent him to Russia for the rest of his schooling and his flight training. So he learned to fly the MiG-17 in Russia, and he was the only MiG-17 ace for the Vietnamese Air Force. The other aces were MiG-21 pilots. And then after '67, Ho Chi Minh retired him because he was a hero of their country, and he didn't want him being shot down. But that gives you an idea what that train was. Again, that's the same train after we had worked on it. This is a storage area, and you can see it's pretty well defined. It's got a nice bunch of shrubs all around it sitting there by itself, so it made a nice looking target. And there's our bombs that we've dropped on it. And there, as I'm flying away, I took a picture of it as I was flying away, and that smoke actually went up to 15,000 feet. They could see it from the ship. That's how much it was burning then. This is a truck towing a 23 millimeter gun, and there was another truck up in front of that, both moving the guns. You can see one up at the very front, then one in the middle, and the third one. So we tried to stop those guys while we could before they got in position to be able to shoot at us. This is what a 85 millimeter sight looks like. This is a standard Russian design. They put things into a star, and it's a little harder to see anymore because these things have faded before I made them scan them. But that's the actual firing of the the 85 in that position. And so this was we were going into Hanoi that day, and so I saw that guy, shooting at me. I thought I might as well take his picture. And this is a SAM site. And again, it's in that same design as you saw for the guns. And these were the radars in the center here. And then these are the places that are revetted that hold the SA-2 missiles. That gives you a little bit more clearer look. You can actually see the missiles in place there and the radars there in the center. So I went and got a little bit lower to take a picture. And that's an SA-2 in flight. That's the size of it.
Is he coming after you?
No, that's why I took his picture. When I saw it was going that way, I thought, oh, hell, I'll take his picture. Why not? And didn't seem, he wasn't a threat.
Right.
So if they're not a threat, don't worry about them. Just keep moving. That one was, although he spiraled down with me, but he ended up impacting the dirt, and I didn't. So I took a picture of where it hit, and that's another one in flight there. And that's another one that just went off in front of me there. The white is actually the explosive, and the red is the fuel. Okay, so that's how you break that down. And it wasn't me that told me that. This is one of our intelligence guys. I was showing him the picture. He said, "Oh, that." He explained it to me. I'm just a dumb pilot. What the heck? What did I know? But
are you taking these pictures through the airplane or by hand with a camera?
by hand with a camera.
Okay.
I had a Pentax Spotmatic, okay, and I put a 135 millimeter lens on it. And then as I go into get near the target area, I take a look in the light meter and get an f-stop reading, and then use bomb tape on the f-stop. And I had already bomb taped the distance to infinity, because I wasn't planning on getting within 35 feet of this stuff. And so that's what I did. So I had a Soliger nice 135 millimeter lens. I had that. So I'd be flying with my left hand, and you just use just use your thumb there to advance it, right? So. But that's the reason. Well, there's a couple of things that the difference in color is because, of course, first it was ectochrome, and it was developed on the ship. Chrotochrome was their own proprietary. So if you had a chrotochrome roll, you would had to set it back to Kodak. Okay, but we could develop the ectochrome on the ship. But the color gets distorted a little bit, especially going through the canopy. And then also age, like I said, these slides were probably 20-some years old before I scanned them and started giving the presentation, because it took a while to kind of go through the whole process of coming back. And I'm sure you're all aware of that. So, but yeah, that's these. Basically, these are all handheld shot photos that. You had nothing else better to do. So there's the result of one of the guys being hit. There was an F-8 pilot, and when I took the picture, I didn't realize he was one of my friends, and he didn't make it. That's the Sidewinder that's burning off. That's aspects right here of this thing doesn't work with that right there. That's the Sidewinder that's actually burned off the side of the fuselage, and it's hard to tell from the terrain because exactly where we were then when that one occurred, but that's what it looks like when you get hit by a SAM. these are the pictures they would give us. These were the guys the photo beanie that you saw that from the video. Okay, those guys would go out and take pictures like this, and they were given a route they had to fly. But you can see that it's a black and white picture, and it's really difficult because of the angles sometimes to exactly see what the hell they were. Some guy with sitting there with, it's like almost microscopic things looking and viewing it. He's trying to come up and tell you all this stuff. Then they hand you this photo with these things highlighted and say, oh, go bomb it, Well, hell, it's most of the time that ground's in color, and it's got all kinds of little different things. And then all of a sudden you're moving, and now they're shooting at you, and you're trying to say, where the hell is the damn target? Trust me, it was really challenging. And what I found out later, and this is really aggravating, but typical of the way things are, they had SR-71s flying over this area. They were taking good color photographs. And we never got to see them. The only photographs that were color were the ones that I was taking, or what some of the other guys that were flying decided to start doing the same thing that I was doing. Again, here's the village. There we're going after a rail transport right here. Here are some of the weapons that were shooting at us. And so you can see we're working on that. And then these were, you've read recently about the bomblets that they're now using over in Ukraine. This is the predecessor to that. These were set into a bomblet or a big shell that would open up, and then these bomblets would drop down. We found them to be pretty useful for anti-aircraft like that. The initial ones we had that were really funny, where they put these little bomblets into the tubes of the old Zuni pods that came back, right? And they had a little pin at the back, and if you hit your release, the things would roll out. And we found them really, really useful at night for when we were, because at night it was very difficult to find people that were moving. And if you did, then what you did, you could fly directly right over them like that, nice and low, hit that, and the stuff would roll out, because all it takes is just a little hole into something to get it burning, right? Doesn't take a lot. And then one night when we were launching with those, the pin fell out and the bomblets started dropping on the carrier deck, and they didn't think that was such a great idea. So they changed the system around. And there you can see all the white stuff is flak that you're seeing there, and you can see the bombs going in on the transshipment area right there in the middle of the village. So all these series are all the same place. This was the city of Haiphong, and we were going after the bridges to try to help isolate, because this was right there at the major port, right on the water. And this is where the ships would come in and unload supplies from China and Russia and stuff. And so in trying to control the flow going southbound, we tried to isolate Haiphong quite a bit. So that was one of our first missions going in there after the bridges. And you can see we got a good hit on the bridge. There's the canals. You can see all the boats in the canals. There's a transshipment side right outside of Haiphong, and it's right on the river here. And if you look, you can see here that's an A-4 in his bombing run. So he's coming down this way, and I'm sitting up above him, up on about a 90-degree. Ready to roll in for mine, and so I took the picture and happened to catch him as also some of the bombs going off on the storage area there.
So you could hit the bridge, but not the barges? Were you allowed to hit the ships?
No. What they did, and actually, I don't know if it's in this series or not, but there was a big coal area there that was just north of Haiphong, okay? And they would ship the coal off to pay for so much of the stuff they were having to buy. And we had gone in there and attacked it several times. And what they did when they found out about the fact that we couldn't hit ships, enemy ships, you know, they brought a derelict ship in there and put a Chinese flag on it, and that was the last time we could do that. But I'm not sure if I've got a picture on this right now, because I've changed the slides around because of time constraints, and like I'm probably getting overtime here with you guys, but it showed all the supplies on this Chinese ship, and we had to just wait till they unloaded it and we'd go after it. You know, we'd spend a day to get a truck, and there was, you know, 100 of them if we had sunk the ship, but we couldn't do that. This is the main big air base up there. It's called Phu Quyen. Now it's actually their international airport for flying in to Hanoi, and this is inbound, okay? And this is a mission where I lost my wingman because we were going after the gun. He and I were going after the guns that day. Actually, this is one of the first missions, and we had several others. But you can see it's a nice, clean runway, and that's with us sitting there doing our thing, dropping our bombs. And this hangar here, it's a very interesting aspect of that you'll see. These are the revetted areas, and you can see a MiG sitting in there. And so what we decided to do in those revetted areas was the same thing we would do for the guns. We'd use some of the bomblets, because again, if you just put a couple holes in an airplane, it's going to make it a little more difficult for it to fly. So that's being that revetted area being taken care of with the bomblets. Fritz Schrader, one of my squadron mates, dropped the walleye, and he flew alongside the walleye, then took this picture, and then he took the other picture that shows kind of the fire damage coming out. Well, the building was there, okay, just like you see it. And so we put in our bomb damage that we did. We took out the hangar. And the Air Force came back and said, no, you didn't take out the hangar, it's still there. So we sent them these pictures and they shut up. Okay, this is Keenan Airfield. And you'll see another airplane here, another one here, another one there, a couple in there. Those are Antov 2s, okay? And the Antovs are actually a Ukrainian company. But the Antov was a bi-wing airplane and could carry a lot of weight, and was a slow flyer. But it was a way for them to transport stuff down south and just fly it. So we were coming out from a mission, and we did limited gun space because the radiation stuff for the missiles that they were shooting at us was put down in our hellhole that held our bullets. So we only had just a few bullets strung along the side of the fuselage there for our 20 mics. But one of the guys saw this, and of course, the minute he said it, every A4 that was in that group put out their speed brakes and stopped and turned and came, I'm going back to get me an airplane. So by the time we left, there wasn't an airplane there that wasn't on fire. But I mean, this was an opportunity for us because, we didn't get a chance to go shoot enemy airplanes much. We were dropping bombs. This gives you an idea of the presentation of kind of where Hanoi is. This was going to be a mission using walleyes to go after the power plant. So this was the way we planned it. But you can see, and those are timing marks, okay, from when we hit the beach, and we were carrying just a walleye, so we were being able to do 360 So that's a 5-minute mark, an 8-minute mark. At the 8-minute mark, we made our turns, and then we all started to split up. There were 6 of us. So the 11 mark was where we were all supposed to then roll out and roll in on the power plant, okay? And so it was because of timing, because once you obscured the target with smoke, the walleye wouldn't know where to go, okay? Because it's just a dumb TV. And also, one of the problems it had is it was also, if it slowed down, because it was just a glider, once it hit its gimbal lock of 30 degrees, it would break lock and you don't know where it was going to go either. So that was one of the reasons why we had to release it in close and fast. That's the Hourglass River that was on that map. So I think I can go backward here. Yeah, you see the Hourglass River right here. Okay, so that picture was just to show you, give you an idea of how we had to read the ground. Because you remember there's no GPS back then. There was certainly no GPS of what North Vietnam looked like, for sure. So that just shows you the Hourglass River. And that's why we called it the Hourglass River, because it's what kind of the shape that it formed. And there is the timing marks for when I was number 6. So you can see where we all were supposed to be when we lined up to drop on the power plant. That's the power plant being hit. This happens to be the lake right here. That's where John McCain landed. And John was in my squadron after he came over from the Forrestal. He was one of the POWs that we had. But he landed in that lake. That is the Paul Domer Bridge. Paul Domer was a famous architect and builder, French. And so he had built that. The F-105s had come in right before us, and you can see the 105s had done a pretty good job on the bridge. We did a lot of strikes with the Air Force guys, the FUD pilots. We gave them crap, of course, but, you know, they were Air Force. But the FUD didn't seem to take a hit as well as the A-4 did. One of the stories I've got is we were going into Bak Gang for the first time, and then they sent in 4 of us A-4s and 4 thuds. Well, it meant that we were up very close to the China-East border, because Bak Gang was just over the border from China, and that's where they would bring in the first supplies that were coming in from China. And of course, Red Crown and some of these other people that were out there supposedly trying to help us and everything were yelling and screaming about how we were there by the border and, you know, oh, you shouldn't be there and all this kind of crap. We're all going, how are we going to get there? You know, this is how you get to there. You got to go there. So, you know, we just disregarded them. But the thuds were in front of us, and 1, 2, and 3 went down right away, and 4 came out underneath me, and the thing about the thud, that sucker was fast. I mean, he had an afterburner that would look, you know, as twice the length of the damned airplane almost. But he was going like beat of heat, but he was also on fire. So I figured, well, that's a pretty good thing. You know, go fast, get out of here, you know. But and then we ended up rolling in but we brought all 4. Jerry Brest, the Felter, he got hit, but we brought his airplane back. That's again downtown Hanoi, from kind of up close and personal, but it's really difficult to see, obviously, but that's part of the community there. This is the power plant that was outside of Hai Phong, and when we actually hit it, and the first bombs are going off, it was just funny and amazing to watch all this electricity just flying everywhere, sparks flying everywhere. And so when I left and pulled up out of I was in a nice turn, so it was just made for a nice picture. Let's see, that's it again, just from another view. This happens to be a MiG-17, in case anybody's interested. And these were pictures that were taken by a friend of mine, Chuck Nelson, who was flying Shrike, okay? And his escort was an F-8 pilot who got called out on another mission. And so he was by himself. So he's sitting there dogfighting this MiG-17 with his left hand, taking pictures with the right hand, trying to figure out how to get him 90 degrees off so he could fire his Shrike at him. He finally got an F-8 into the fight, and that's the first Sidewinder that went out there, and it missed the MiG. You can see it right here. That MiG's in a left-hand turn. Now, in the length of time this takes this missile to hit the water, look where he went from a left-hand turn to over here in a right-hand turn. That airplane had tremendous capability in being able to move and move itself, okay? And so that's why they used the A-4 to replicate MiG-17s when we started Top Gun. There's finally the other Sidewinder now hitting the MiG, and then there's where the MiG impacted the water. This is the famous Thanwha Bridge. This was a bridge that had been rebuilt in the by the Viet Minh had originally destroyed the original bridge. Again, it's a Paul Dormer bridge, and it was rebuilt and then dedicated because Thanwha was Ho Chi Minh City, and where he was from, and so they were very proud of that. There we are hitting the bridge, and we figured if we could ever drop that bridge, the damn war would be over. Well, we never dropped it. Here we are back at the carrier. There's an F-8 on final, and I'm taking his picture and getting ready to follow him in. So that's what the ship looked like. It's kind of a tiny little thing. And here's me back around the LSO station taking some pictures of guys coming aboard. That's the 3-wire, the number target wire, where that A4 is about ready to catch. This is the F-8 coming aboard. And there's a picture. You can see how much his wheels are off the deck there. That's a pretty violent catch. And the run out, you can see there, this is the end of the deck right here. So it ran out really pretty far. This was Don Davis. Don was my mentor. And Don at the time had more A4 time than any other pilot in the Navy. And we lost him in 1967. He was married with 3 kids. And it was back in the time when his wife was living on the base, and they came in and said, well, you got to get out of here. Your husband's no longer employed by the United States Navy. I thought that was a pretty hard thing to do. And I think that any of you that have seen that We Were Soldiers with more than what his wife had to go through. Ralph was my roommate. Actually, one of my 3 roommates I lost. He came back in 2008, 41 years after we lost him. His whole family had been gone. Me and some of the other guys, we had the POW bracelets with his name on it. And some of them had been broken because you had to manually adjust them and they would break in the middle. But we put all of our bracelets in the casket with him when he was buried at Arlington. He came back as a lieutenant commander because he was a JG like myself. At the time he was lost, but they promoted him because he was missing in action. He got his promotions up until the time in 1973 when the guys came back, and then he was declared dead. This was Duels. Duels was my roommate. Duels was the guy that taught me how to ski. Came from Manchester, skied on the U.S. ski team. I always had that smile. Short, red-headed guy, a hell of an athlete. Also a woman chaser, so they had to kick him off the team. But he didn't have any problem with women. He got them all when he wanted. We lost him. He is still there because he went down in the harbor there at Haiphong, and they've never gone down to try to recover the airplane because they'll only bring back human remains. They don't bring back. So Don came back in 1988. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that. He came back in 88. Ralph came back in 2008. So right now, Duels is still there. This is Jeff. This is my wingman. And what happened to Jeff was we were going into Fukien there, the MiG base. We were after the guns. And for whatever reason, I just happened to look to my right. And I mean, I was dead, basically. There was just a missile right there. And all I could do was just grab the stick just kind of hard like that. Well, the A-4 was such a sensitive airplane, you flew it with just your fingertips. You didn't, it would roll 720 degrees a second. That's the fastest roll rate of any airplane out there. So you could, it was really very maneuverable, very quick to move. And just by grabbing the stick, I moved the airplane up enough. The missile went right through me, and Jeff was out, beam me, but he obviously was not looking to the right because we were in a left turn, headed to go into the weapons that we were after, and so he didn't see it, and that thing hit him, and there was nothing left. And they found parts of his airplane. They've actually found parts of his helmet, and but they found no human remains. So poor Jeff is there. He had a couple kids, married guy. He was actually senior to me rank-wise, but he was junior to me with experience-wise. So that's why I was the lead and he was the wingman. But a really nice gentleman. This was our baby, Skip Baux. Skip was my wingman one time and got shot down, then they recovered him. But he was flying with another friend of mine called Step and a half, because Step was really short, so it took him a step and a half to keep up with the rest of us, you know. So he was flying with Step at night, and I was up next, so we went out there looking for him, couldn't find him. But he got married 2 weeks before we left the States, and he was 21 years old. He'd come out as a nav kid, and he was returned in '93. He's down at Pensacola now. This is Bill Rankin. Bill came to us for '68 and was a lieutenant commander, very experienced S2F pilot, but he had very limited time in the A-4. He and I had lunch together in Hawaii, and so that night he went off the cat, and he had told me about the problems he was having off the cat, and so we talked about it. But I didn't want to go over his head and go talk to the skipper and say, I don't think he's quite ready for doing some of this. And he went off at night and ended up flying into the water. And so I've always felt, and I got into doing a lot of safety work with while I was with Delta, that was one of my failures. I should have said something, even though it might have been, but you think you're trying to be loyal to him, but you're also worried about his career. But I should have said something. Instead, we lost him. So that's it. And I'll hand the mic back to that guy.
Let's see if there's any questions for us, Tom Mule.
Oh, yeah.
Good, here we got
Yes.
What was your basic cruising speed in the A4 as opposed to the F8?
Basic cruising speed would usually be between 350 to 300. When we were doing our nuclear missions that we were trained to do, you know, that was where you do low-level work, and you had two fuel tanks on board and a centerline nuke, right? So you'd go out to sea at 300 miles, and then you'd lower and go down to 50 feet and fly in to the beach. You'd have to figure out where the hell you were. We had maps that we had developed that you put on your kneeboard, and it had your timing marks and everything. And so you'd pick up where you were, get over to where you needed to be for the next checkpoint, and that we planned at 360. Okay, so you were doing a mile a minute. So it was pretty easy to do, you know, the timing. So you'd use different landmarks to try to use for the way you would fly. Then when we get to the target, it required that we fly 450 knots and pull 4 Gs up, and we had what was called a labs, or a automatic device to sit there and release the nuclear weapon. You could do it where you pitch it forward, or you could do it where it would be over the shoulder, where you would go up and it would come off at about 120 degrees. And it depended on the target and what you had. Did you have a point in front of the target that you were assigned, where you could use for timing to pitch the nuke weapon forward, or like in my case, I always had this airport there right off of Japan, you know, in the Sakhalin Islands, and I had to fly actually over the airport and then pull up, and I'd get to 120, and the bomb would come off and it'd go straight up, and you'd roll on over and try to see if you could get away before the thing went off. It wasn't much of a good idea, especially since I was number 6 out of other things, missiles and another 105 and, you know, stuff like that. So who knows how many nuke weapons were going to go on that damn little poor airport that I've actually flown over as a Delta pilot, and it's no longer there. So silly.
What was your takeoff weight and takeoff speed for carrier?
Our takeoff weight most of the time was sitting there right around 22,000 pounds. And we were 140 knots. They wanted a 140 knot end speed. And then what we do, especially when you're heavy, you just rotate to the burble to try to get climbing, and you just ease off that nose just a little bit and just let it struggle, eventually get in the air. And once you were going in the air, you were fine.
Did you ever know Stockdale?
Yes.
He flew that mission with McCain. Do you have any comments to make about
Well, he was flying for our squadron, so he was considered, even though he was CAG, because he was in our airplane, he was considered a saint, okay? So but that was in 65. I think it was 65. Yeah, 65. He went down, and then Harry Jenkins, our skipper, went down in 65. So Stockdale went down in 65, you know, and but he was CAG at the time. He went down, and then he had been an F-8 pilot on the cruise before, an F-8 skipper, and I actually met his wife first. I met a couple of the wives because we had 5 POWs total in my squadron, and so we met some of the wives, and we had a chance to sit down and talk with them. And I talked with Sybil first before I actually met him later. And of course, like I said, John McCain was in the squadron, and so he was one of our POWs as well.
They went down together, didn't they, on the same mission?
No. McCain went. Okay, McCain was on the Forrestal, okay, and they came out in '67. And that was when the guys were arming the Zuni pod on the F-4. And that Zuni fired, and it went across and hit an A-4 that was next to McCain's airplane. Okay, and that's what started the fire on the Forrestal. And we were out there. I've actually got pictures of her burning. And at any rate, we had lost a lot of pilots in both squadrons, both A-4 squadrons, because we lost 30 A-4s over there between the two squadrons. We left the States with 28, so we obviously had a little loss right there. So they went over to the Forrestal guys that were A-4 drivers and said, "Hey, any one of you guys volunteer to come join, because we need some pilots?" And of course McCain did, because he was a lieutenant commander and he didn't have any combat time. So if you wanted to get promoted, which John wanted to, you had to have your combat time in, So he came over, joined our squadron, and he landed. He came right in. He flew his first mission on October the 1st, and he was on his 20th mission, and October 26th was the anniversary of the fire on the Oriskany, and he went down that day. and landed in that lake I showed a picture of.
What year was that?
67. So he was there 67, came back in 73.
You said the cat shot was 140. What was stall speed?
Well, at that weight, was pretty damn close right to it. Yeah. There wasn't that much margin. That usually they would try to give you 10 knots, but we weren't getting 10 knots when we were loaded for bear.
And what was your final approach for traffic speed?
It would be right around 130. So we were really slow compared to, say, the F-8s. The F-8s, those poor bastards were coming aboard 160. And I mean, on a small carrier like that, I had one of the F-8 guys, die in front of me on a night mission in 68. And he was such a great guy and so experienced. But flying back then was just a little different. And the F-8 was very, very challenging to bring aboard. And at nighttime, he had been on a double cycle, so they'd flown a 3-hour trip. It was on the end of a 14-hour day. It was black as hell out there that night. And I ended up topping off his wingman. They sent his wingman to QB, or not to QB, but to Chulai. I went up and stayed up at 27,000 feet was our best altitude for fuel saving. I went up there and eventually came down at 0 fuel and flamed out over the ramp. But I made it. But it was just that's just what they expected out of you then. I don't know what else to say. I mean, it's a lot different now for the guys, and it's a great thing. We lost too many people in Nam, okay? And it's because we didn't have any standoff weapon capability. Well, now the guys, that are flying the F-22s, the F-35s, the F-18s, the F-16s, they all have standoff capability. Well, that means that we're going to bring those kids home. And that's a good thing. It costs more money, all right, to have those weapons. Those are not cheap weapons, but at least we get the kids home. We lost a lot of pilots over there.
Would you tell them real quick about how you led the guys off the Oriskany during the fire? How you rescued your
roommates? Oh.
We'll wrap it up.
Oh, okay.
I think a lot of people want to hear about what you did to save your roommates during the Oriskany fire.
Well, okay. This is probably the only times you're ever going to think that drinking is good for you. You're not supposed to drink on a ship. You're not supposed to have the booze, right? Although the flight surgeons would give you some when you came back from something that was kind of bad. But I liked my booze back then, and I had some on board, right? Well, we used to have to get rid of the booze bottles. Well, one of the guys in the bunk room there with me, he knew a back way that went out to the back of the side of the bunk room, because we were over on the port side of the carrier, and then we went out to an old World War II sponson where they used to have guns during World War II. And from there, you could throw your bottle right over the side, and nobody even knew you were there. And so as it turned out, when the day of the fire, I had flown a night mission, then briefed for about 5 other night missions because everything kept getting canceled because of the weather, and that's why they were downloading the flares, and the flares were being stored in the flare locker, okay? So one of the flares went off, and the kids didn't understand that these flares generated their own oxygen. They thought that if you dug down the ears, it would burn up the oxygen and the fire would go out, which is there's nothing wrong with that thinking. They just didn't understand the chemistry of the flares. So next thing I know, I'm sitting there in my bunk trying to sleep, and our AI comes running through the door, Scotty Wilkins, and he said, "We're going to die, we're all going to die." And I said, "Who gives a shit? We know that." We did. We felt like we were going to die anyway. It didn't matter. So he comes in, and then meanwhile, there's smoke coming in with him, and I was going, "Oh, this is pretty serious." So we went around and we got the guys up that were still in the bunk room. There was 8 of us, and so we got dressed, and I said, let's get some towels, because we had a kind of a semi-bathroom. It was all it was sinks, you know, no toilets and no shower, but it was sinks and everything. So we went in there, wet down some towels, because we'll put those over our head. And then I said, okay, I know the back way out. And Fritz had happened to be there, who's the other guy. So I told Fritz, you take the lead, you know, because we're going to be crawling, because now the lights are out. We've lost electricity. It's black as hell. Smoke's there. And so I said, and I'll be at the very end. So if somebody gets cut off or broken up, at least one of us is around to let everybody know how to get out here, because the other guys didn't know how to get out there. And so we started crawling along, and you go over these, what we call knee knockers. Then what happens is you've got these passageways of the ship. Well, to strengthen the ship as a whole, they have a wall there that's all steel, right? But you got to move. You got to go back and forth. So they cut a hole in this thing, and they put a big piece of meal around that to steady it and support it. So that's what we had to go through. We had to go through several of those. So we had to go through 4 knee knockers, make a right, okay, go through 2 knee knockers, make a left, and then make another right, and we would be in the outside. And we tried to explain that to everybody as we're all, you know, before we left and all crawling out. So, you know, Fritz is up there and I'm in the back, and we're sitting there each holding on the guy's belt, just crawling along in the dark and the smoke. And so eventually one of the guys lost the belt, but I was there. So like Fritz got about half of them, I got about half of them out. Then I made a mistake, because when we got out there with the second group, the first group was gone. I'm going, where the hell did they go? You know, well, actually, they went up on the flight deck. So I'm just sitting there trying to figure out what to do. So I thought I'd go down on the hangar deck, because I thought the fire was up there, because that's where the airplanes are. That's where the bombs are. So I went down there. Well, guess what? It was the fire was down there. And I walk in, and here's some poor kid dragging a big 3-inch fire hose. It wasn't full yet, but he's dragging it, you know, and he's walking in water. It was about knee deep, because they use salt water for the extinguishers there that were just overhead in the compartment there of the hangar bay. And so you don't leave a shipmate behind. So next thing I know, it's him and me, then another couple of guys join, and the next thing you know, we got one of the guys to go turn on the water for that, and I opened up the hose on that, and I'm going, whoa! I mean, a 3-inch fire hose has got some power. Whoa, shit! So we finally, you know, kept walking into the fire, and there was this. The other thing that I remember was there was this helo there. It was on fire, and of course the helicopter's got a lot of magnesium and everything in it, so they burned pretty good. And the helicopter pilots around here, they know exactly what I'm talking about. That helicopters are fragile and burn well. So I'm walking up towards this helicopter, you know, and all of a sudden, you know, it disappeared. And I'm going, I really couldn't believe it. I mean, I was like, what happened? You know, I thought I was hallucinating, you know, because it wasn't fun with the smoke and the other crap in there. And what I found out later was that because it had been on fire, the tin can came up alongside, and the guys shot a wire across to them. And then what they do is they shoot a string, and then they capture it. Then they start pulling, and they end up getting eventually a large, you know, wire rope to be on board that ship. That's how you transfer stuff around in the Navy. So you shoot a line first, then you pull the other stuff across. All right, well, they pulled it across, and they hooked it up to the helo, and they pulled, the tin can pulled the helo right out through the hangar bay door. You know, and I didn't know it, you know, it just disappeared. So anyway, I was down there fighting the fire for about 3 hours, I think, something like that.
No breathing apparatus?
No. We didn't even have fire protection gear for the guys that were they did have firefighters, but there weren't, you got to remember, this is it was a pretty big fire, so they couldn't be everywhere. And if you'll see, if you go back and, do a Google or something, you'll see pictures of hoses all over. One of the guys that was injured in 67, Marvelous Marv Reynolds, right? Well, Marvelous Marv was he was in a stateroom with another guy. Well, his roommate got out and died almost immediately right outside but the fire was there, so he had closed the door, and he was sitting there, putting towels and wetting things around to try to keep himself from the fire. But he happened to have a porthole, which was normally they'd gotten rid of all the portholes during World War II because it weakened the hull of the ship and we were losing a lot of ships. So they normally tried to get rid of those. So he ended up in all the smoke and everything, trying to dig around. He finally found the wrench for it and opened up that porthole, and he's sticking his head out of the porthole, and the helicopter, that Angel that we were talking about and you had the picture of, he happened to see him. And so then he signaled the guys up on the flight deck, get a hose down to this guy, and eventually they started swinging a hose. And finally, he was able to catch the hose and brought it in. So he fought the fire from inside his room with that hose. So it's incredible how things happen, and the ingenuity and the guts of people. I mean, and we're all capable of it. It's not anything that's exceptional, but the military is a good place to learn to do things. So, I would always tell young kids that it's a way to actually define yourself. You learn a lot about yourself just because of the going through with all the discipline that's required, whether you're enlisted or whether you're officer, it doesn't really matter. And you all pull together as a team anyway. It's teamwork. We wouldn't have been able to fly that airplane without some kid, 22-year-old kid that's a mechanic that's working on it, or the plane captain that's carrying. Those are heavy, very heavy chains. Those kids had to lug around wherever that airplane went. He had to do that because anything that was up on the deck had to be tied down. So, and they're 18 and 19 and 20-year-old kids. Amazing.
How many casualties total in the Oriskany fire?
There was 47 killed, 37 pilots. Because it ended up being in forward officers' country, which was where most of everybody except for a couple enlisted, almost everybody was an officer because the fire was actually the helicopter pilots. And that's another story. Is we were on our way to Hong Kong, and there was a big hurricane, and there was a civilian ship that had been in danger, and they needed their people rescued, and our helicopter pilots went out there and did that. And when we got to Hong Kong, they were given awards and everything. Well, the helicopter guys were sitting there. Their room was on top of the storage for the flares, and we'd lost almost the whole detent. They evaporated. There was nothing left there. And for the number one elevator, as you'd walk up into that was right up forward there too. Well, it had walls about that thick of steel, and right along the starboard side there where the fire was, if you would go by that, because we'd have to go by that to go down to the wardroom to eat, there was a hole about the size of this room, in diameter, and there was no molten steel on the ground. It burned the steel. That's how hot that fire was. So, and it burnt that hole right through all that steel.
Let's give Ken another round of applause.